Why werewolves? Why is it vampires versus werewolves? Why not vampires versus puppies or vampires versus politicians? That's what we're going to talk about today, folks. Exactly that. Vampires versus werewolves. Before I continue, I have to say you people have become way too obsessed with Twilight. I type in vampire versus werewolves on Google, and almost the whole page I look at is nothing but that image or some image related to Edward and Jacob. Just saying, okay? Why werewolves? Well, let's examine the other beings who could have been fighting vampires. And let me point out, in vampire lore, folklore, and history, there is nothing about vampires versus werewolves. This is all fictional history, fictional novels, modern fiction, okay? So let's count down some of the beings who could have fought vampires and maybe put up a good fight. Mummies! Mummies at first glance would seem to be very dangerous. They're powerful. They're very focused on one goal. They don't sleep. They don't breathe. They don't eat. But they're only in certain areas of the world. In Egypt, Latin America, not that other cultures don't have mummies. Also, the fact is that a vampire is also very strong, very fast, and while they are limited to running around mostly at nighttime, few of them can walk around the day, many of them are also very happy about modern technology. I mean, a vampire is swift and powerful, but give him a flamethrower, the mummy's probably not going to do too well. Also, mummies, as far as I know, are not known for putting themselves back together. Well, outside of the mummy movies, of course, but yeah. So who's next on our list? Witches! Witches. You would think they'd make a great opponent against vampires. They're powerful, strong, there's probably quite a few of them. But their power levels are inconsistent. Sometimes it's about what knowledge they know. They get the magic from books or items or their own blood. I'm not saying there aren't a few good novels out there where the witches are the first person, the major character, and they deal with werewolves and vampires and demons. But having a whole ideological setup between vampires and witches does seem a little difficult. Vampires, let's face it, most of the time are looked at as creatures of the night, cursed and evil. And they have goals which they want to do. They want to drink blood, but they don't want to be wiped out. Witches, well, it's kind of all over the place. Some cultures consider witches evil, some cultures consider witches good. Also, to be honest, there are some people who still practice it. So writing about it could get you into legal issues. You don't want to offend people. And I'm not talking about political correctness, I'm just talking about showing respect. I went to Salem State College. I went to college with witches, and I was going to a college in a community which has been influenced greatly by the people who live there, who are also witches, or Wicca. I think it depends more on the preference of the person practicing. And I've seen good, and I've seen how people treated them badly too. I was told at one point during Halloween, sometimes people who believe greatly in the Bible would burn crosses in the lawns of these witches. So, you know. Let's move on to the next being who might be a opponent against the vampires. Let's talk about the Fae. Okay, that's Fae from Cowboy Bebop. I misspoke. Let me use a more modern term. Fairy. No, not that kind of fairy. F-A-E-R-Y. You know what? That's close enough. Fae or fairy don't live in our dimension. They live in another world, as you could say. There's many types. If you ever read Harry Potter, in fact, she uses a lot of folklore plus her own imagination, so she's getting a lot of it right. It's not that they're evil or good, they just have their own world, their own ideas, and if you call them or request their presence, you have to be very polite. It's not really rituals as much as just common courtesy and how they treat them. You have to be very careful. You don't want to actually thank them. Some of them find that offensive. Like, basically, you're thanking them for doing something as if you're suggesting they had to do it. And also, it's not as universally known as you'd think. A lot of people do have folklore about fairy and all that, but some do not, and there's reasons for that. Spain, for example, in modern Portugal, only has one tale, Hunchback and the Fairies, because during the 15th century, the Spanish Inquisition, very strong in Spain, made it so even having knowledge of these tales was the equivalent of saying, I'm a witch, prosecute me. Now, it is a little mislabeled. I think more witch hunting and burnings happened in the German states in Central Europe, but the Spanish kept better records. Now, that means that in some areas of the world, vampires versus fairies aren't going to mean much to people. Also, once again, fairies are kind of powerful. Probably the most powerful beings I've mentioned on this list of beings. So for vampires to go against fairy, especially when vampire translates to wolf fairy, they're probably going to be outmatched. So what have we learned? Well, werewolves are probably the best thing to go against vampires. Their powers are pretty well known in folklore. There's limits and borders to what they can do. They're also considered cursed, so they might actually be as much sympathy for the vampires and the werewolves. Now, in fact, also books are starting to come out which deal from the werewolves' point of view, or at least from Shape Changer's point of view. And there's also other books coming out where werewolves and vampires kind of work together to try to keep the peace. I wonder in the next few years if we're going to see novels and movies about vampires and werewolves living together and working together. I wonder what that'd look like. Oh, come on. You know what? I'm not going to rave. You know why? Because the internet's right in this one. Think about it. Bella is a horrible girlfriend. Jacob is intelligent, stable most of the time, has actual expressions on his face, and he goes around topless. Edward couldn't really do worse, now that I think about it. Okay, folks, this is the end of this recording. I'm going to try to burn out any memory of this recording, and tomorrow I'll deny ever making it. All right. Have a good day.